Okay, you're ready to go, Vice Chair Perkins.
Okay, call to order this meeting of the San Ramon City Finance Committee for September the 13th, 2021. Guess I'll turn it back to the city clerk for announcements.
Yes, thank you. Governor Newsom's executive orders pertaining to the Brown Act currently remain in effect, allowing public meetings like this one to be held by teleconference to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. At this time, I will conduct a roll and ask the Vice Chair to recognize me afterward to confirm certain matters of the record. Committee Member Veros?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Perkins?
Yes.
Thank you. Based on the responses to roll call, the record should reflect that all committee members can hear the proceedings clearly. If there are no objections, the record will further reflect that each committee member believes, based on voice or facial recognition or otherwise, that the persons representing themselves to be council members are in fact council members. No objections? Yes.
Okay, good.
Seeing no objection, I'll turn the meeting back over to the Vice Chair with a reminder that all votes must be taken by roll call.
Okay, so we'll start with, I guess it's public comment. And do we have any members of the public that would like to comment at this time on items that are not on the agenda? We have call-in user 1. So if this is not on the agenda, please, once you admit caller user 1,
okay,
and we'll start with that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Perkins and Councilmember Veros. I would like to speak about my recent appeal filed with Deputy City Clerk for the Sandbox VR. And to this day, you guys have not granted me the appeal that my $2,500 has been accepted for. And I feel that if our city is going to be financially sound to the resident, that when the resident files something and deposited money per request, that the city should properly reply. And I also don't understand why that the role of our city clerk and finance and attorneys seem to be really blurred. According to the appeal form, I filed the document with the clerk, and the clerk also accepted my money, but then the attorney office is the one who is intercepting the case, and therefore my case cannot be heard. I really would like to have my appeal be calendared on a city council meeting per my right as a citizen to appeal before the council. Why I think that there was abuse of discretion for passing the land permit use for Sandbox VR. Thank you.
Any other public comment? As you know, we cannot discuss things that are not on today's agenda. I recommend you take your issues up with the city manager, city attorney, and the city clerk. Okay, no other public comment. Should we defer the Finance Committee minutes to the next meeting since Sabina's not here? Or can we approve it as they're written?
You can approve as to form, or they can be deferred. It's the pleasure of the committee.
Well, Sridhar, what do you think?
Let's defer.
Okay, we'll defer them to the next meeting. All right, now we're on to new business, and boy, do we have a lot of new business. Let's start with 5.1, proposed funding agreement with Bay Area Air Quality Management District and commitment from San Ramon to appropriate funds in the amount of $277,000 and change for the purchase and installation of 4 electric vehicle charging stations. Darlene Amaral.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Vice Chair Perkins and Committee Member Veros. The item before you this evening is to discuss the proposed funding agreement with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and commitment from San Ramon to appropriate funds in the amount of $277,045 for the purchase and installation of 4 electric vehicle charging stations. Staff is recommending that the Finance Committee provide feedback and consider authorizing the city manager to sign the funding agreement with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and to commit the appropriate funds of $277,045 to install and purchase 4 EV charging stations. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, so I would like to go over that. Christina, am I in control or you?
I am.
Okay, so you can go next slide. Okay, so a little bit of information about the CHARGE program. The BAAQMD CHARGE program provides grant opportunities for public agencies to help offset the cost to purchase and install electric vehicle charging infrastructure throughout the 9 Bay Area counties. The program is funded with Transportation Fund for Clean Air, which is referred to as TFCA. Funding is available on a competitive basis to public agencies, and the project sponsors are reimbursed after the EV charging stations are installed and placed in service. Next slide. So today, currently in the city, we have 267 EV charging stations. These are throughout the city. These charging stations are open to the public, and majority of the stations are installed by the private sector. For city-owned property, we have 4 charging stations that are also available and open to the public. At the police station at 2401, at the Doherty station, here at City Hall. This one is currently out of service and discussions are underway to replace this current unit. And then at the San Ramon Transit Center, we have 4 stations there as well. You can go to the next slide. So I know this is really small, but this was included in the packet. It is a map showing all the EV charging stations throughout the city. And as you can see up in the Doherty Valley area, there's just not as many as there are in the, down the Bollinger Canyon intersection right there and within Bishop Ranch. So that's why we focused this grant for the Doherty Valley area. Next. So this is some background of the timeline. Back in January, staff participated in the CHARGE program. It was a pre-application webinar. And then on March 18th, an application was submitted to purchase and install 4 charging stations at the following locations up in the Doherty Valley area: the San Ramon Sports Park and the Tasahara Ridge staging area. The total project cost was the $277,000 and some change. And that includes the charging station, hardware, the installation, the labor, and materials, and also a 5-year warranty and the network fees. Matching funds of $22,823 have been secured from the 501 Contra Costa program, and that's to help offset the total cost of the project. Next slide. On March 26th, staff provided council with an update via the city manager weekly update. And then on August the 10th, staff received a notice of proposed funding for the TFCA funding of $44,000. And then on August 30th, we actually received the funding agreement from BAAQMD. So now the city, at the time that we received the funding agreement, the city has 60 days to sign and execute the funding agreement. Next slide. So the city is responsible for 100% of the upfront cost prior to receiving the reimbursement of the $44,000. So I put together this chart. Hopefully this kind of explains the total out-of-pocket costs for the city. So the total cost is that $277,000. And then the 501 Contra Costa matching funds. So the out-of-pocket cost for this current fiscal year for the city would be $254,222. Over time, the city is going to receive the reimbursement of the $44,000 that was awarded the TFCA award. The first reimbursement is within 60 days. So the city has 1 year once the funding agreement is executed. We have 1 year to install and put into service the charging stations. Once they are installed and operational, the city can apply for the first reimbursement up to 85% of that $44,000. The Air District does hold on the remaining 15% for a minimum of 3 years. And that 15% will be reimbursed once all the final paperwork and documentation is sent in to show the usage requirements. Next slide. So given that the funds are not included in the 21-22 budget, staff is recommending that the Finance Committee consider the following 2 options. Option number 1, appropriate the funds from the general fund during this fiscal year, during the mid-year budget cycle. Or option number 2, decline to submit the funding agreement. If the funding agreement is not signed and submitted, the grant funds will not be awarded to the city and the project will not proceed. Next slide. If option 1 is selected, the next step is to forward the funding agreement and the Finance Committee recommendation to the City Council for approval on September 28th. And then if option 2 is selected, Finance will notify the BAAQMD of the city's decision to withdraw the grant application. So at this time, I would like to open up for some questions and comments.
Oh, well, Sridhar, your questions or comments?
Thank you for presentation. My question, so as the funding is going to be done by city, or we are receiving the grants in turn, is the charging by charge point is going to be according to their pricing, or is it going to be subsidized to the residents? How the charge to the residents?
So the estimate that we received were for charge point stations, and they were based on their current rates at the time that we got the estimate back earlier this year, with no discount provided.
Okay, so basically we are as a city, we are installing for convenience of residents, and then charge point will be charging the residents as whenever they charge according to their price model.
So, okay, so just to clarify that, with going with charge point, the city has control in setting the price charged to our residents and to our community. So the city, these charging stations we would own and we would operate. The maintenance part of it is if anything was to go wrong with the charging stations, then ChargePoint would send out a technician to maintain and provide service for anything for necessary maintenance to the charging stations.
Okay. So whatever the charge that, so we will, as a city, we will decide the price for the charge for whatever the kilowatt that is.
There are some standard rates. We would probably set those rates to match or similar to what we have existing. With our current charging stations, we have a ChargePoint charging station right now located at 2401, and that the rate will be the same as that one. The Blink stations that we have at the transit center, we do not control the rates. Blink controls the rates. So the ChargePoint will be the same for every ChargePoint that the city has or owns.
Sounds good, because when, yes, we are getting the money from grant, but still end of the day, we are the one who's spending 277K, right? So that's good to know that we control the pricing. And
yes.
Who gets the revenue? That's kind of my question. You can charge $1 a kilowatt hour, you can charge 20 cents a kilowatt hour, but who gets the money?
So the revenue does come back to the city of San Ramon.
Okay. And we also pay for that electricity because obviously somebody has to provide the electricity. We pay for that electricity at whatever the current rates are that we're paying for electricity, but we get the revenue from these charging stations because our net cost is about $210,000 or about $52,000 per station. Now, obviously at 50 cents a kilowatt hour, that's a whole lot of kilowatt hours. So these are not destined to be money makers for the city, but at least we get some reimbursement over time from these. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to satisfy myself on the revenue issues and who decides the price and who gets the money.
Sounds good. Darlene, one more thing is I do see certain charging stations, they have solars installed on top of them.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have any plans for that so that we can charge this using the solar?
So I actually had a meeting scheduled to talk with the vendor that provides that type of service. And in the individual I was talking with via email, he ended up no longer at the company. So I'm trying to find another individual to set up a meeting so I can learn more about that. Because it's something that it might be worth looking into, especially at some locations that don't have the parking spaces or the electrical unit is so far away from where the parking is. So I'm definitely looking into that.
That sounds good. Especially San Ramon Sports Park, we have a huge parking lot. So there is a lot of scope for us definitely to put something with built-in solar. That way we can generate additional revenue as well as, climate. Yeah. That adds credit to our city that we are implementing climate control friendly, environmental friendly charging stations. So perfect. Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. How did those locations get chosen?
So the city has an internal EV infrastructure committee, which consists of staff from building, public services, engineering, planning, transportation. And that's how that map came about. That committee designed and created that map. And we just looked at the area in San Ramon that was that didn't have that amount of charging stations available to the public. And that's how we chose Doherty Valley.
Well, I don't disagree with Doherty Valley. Trust me, I think
Mhm.
that's fabulous. But the Tassajara Ridge Park, I'm just very skeptical that we're going to be able to meet those requirements of, usage requirements, the 90, there were some really big numbers, I thought, on the for usage, and we won't get our reimbursement if we don't have that kind of usage. I'm trying to scroll back to those numbers. I'm just really concerned. I mean, let's see, what was the usage? Oh, here we go. What's going on in Doherty? What's going out at that station? So you're going to have 22,000 kilowatt hours on one station, or yeah. I just find that location is not what I would have thought would have high usage and have a really great demand. I would have thought there's much better places in Doherty Valley, even putting the last station also at the sports park. To me, would make more sense than the and then the Tassajara staging area. The other place would be the Bark and Ride, is something that I would think would actually have a higher, at least opportunity for the usage. I just find that location out there is. I've been out there a few times, and honestly, I don't see anybody. I'm usually the only one there. And is this thing going to generate? Joe, can you comment on that? Help me out here. Or are you reluctant to help me out?
Well, I'm reluctant. No, they do have a committee, and
Yeah.
you consider different aspects of it. So I'm reluctant in that sense that
Yeah.
they've thought it through, but you certainly bring up a good point, and I think we probably should maybe revisit to make sure we're comfortable with that one specific location. I think that would be prudent to do.
So
One of the other things that's associated with that is, if you put all of your charging stations at one location, the electrical infrastructure all in one location is considerably cheaper than if you had your 4 stations spread at 4 places. Now you've got to bring in, power to 4 places. Now I recognize you only selected 2 locations, but collapsing 2 to 1 does save money. The stations themselves don't change in price, but bringing the utilities to that particular site is a construction cost that can be substantial if you don't have the infrastructure nearby. I like this. I want to move forward with this, but honestly, I would like more justification for the Tassajara staging area as a potential site. Not that I'm objecting to. I think having them at Doherty Station by the library and community center, to me, makes more sense than the staging area. Putting one right by the libraries. People go into the library, somebody parks and can charge there, and while they're in the library or the community center. But that may make a mess of some other project we've got in mind. But I would recommend that we approve this, go forward with this, but I would also like greater justification for the Tassajara staging area. And I would like the committee to at least discuss maybe splitting them 2 and 2 at the Dougherty Station and at the sports park. The sports park, I think, is a great place. That's kind of on one side of and one kind of corner of the Dougherty Valley area. And I think that the Dougherty Station certainly gets a whole lot more traffic and a whole lot more people coming and going.
If you'd like to move forward with the grant, we could do that and then revisit the locations through the infrastructure committee and make sure those are honed in a lot better and get a better look at specifically the locations and why. To include
feel about
your
that?
recommendation of potentially consolidating them.
Yeah, consolidating 4 in one location or 2
Okay.
and 2, or I just think that the Tassajara staging area is just so remote. There's nobody that lives past it. Granted, there are people who pass it, but it isn't a central point around which you draw customers. Whereas the Dougherty Station is a central point, and there's lots of customers around there. I mean, we've got the new neighborhood right next door. We've got customers all around. Plus, you got the college kids and the students and library. You've also got the child care center next door. So there's lots of opportunities for customers there.
Just
All right,
Tassajara Ridge.
Sridhar, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, on Tassajara Ridge, in pre-COVID, there used to be not that many people. Actually, it is pretty close to my place, so I go there like almost very regularly. And post-COVID, like after the COVID, now every day when I see, almost every evening, that parking lot is full.
Okay, that's good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, so people are taking a trail heavily. So
yeah, but the parking lot is 40 vehicles or so.
that's right.
And I just think that the Dougherty Station, more opportunity there between the youth or the child care center, the library, the Dougherty Station itself, the college, depending on where you put the station. I'd like that to be considered. Okay, so the recommendation of the Finance Committee is to move forward with this and to do a little more assessments on the locations. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I just would like a little more assessment and justification for particularly the Tassajara Ridge location. Okay. All right. We're done with that one. Let's go on to number 2.
Vice Chair Perkins, you do have a hand raised for public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. All right. Let's hear from the public.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm wondering if these charging stations are applicable for all electric cars, or they're hybrid electric cars or hydrogen, can all use these? Doesn't matter if they're Teslas or Toyotas. Are they generic, or they only serve Tesla? Number 1. Number 2, the presenter said something about there is currently a charging station that is out of order. I would like to know how long that has been out of order and what was the usage, like how much of the electricity voltage did it log before it went out, and why did it go out of order? Was it due to vandalism? Was it due to breakdown or wear and tear? And do we get credit for that? In other words, when we buy these stations, is there warranty? If it is, poor manufacturing workmanship, then we should not have to pay for something that's out of order or have to replace it out of our own pocket again. It should be replaced maybe at a discounted price by, is it the company called Charge Point? I would like to have those questions clarified, please.
Thank you. Darlene, do you have, I believe these charging stations are more universal. They are not Tesla only. Tesla installs their own. They are over by the Safeway Center at Crow Canyon and San Ramon Valley Boulevard. They have another one at the Target. And I believe there's plans to put one in at the Gateway Center at the south end of town. These would be more useful for people with like a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Volt or something like that. Is that correct, Darlene?
So for the charge program, the charging stations that we are proposing are universal chargers. So any car can charge on those stations. And in regards to the City Hall station, that is a different station. That's a Blink station. It's a fast charger. And currently we are working directly with Blink, and we're also working with ChargePoint in replacing that unit.
By the way, Tesla car, they provide a charge adapter so that you can use for charge point or anywhere.
Yeah.
So the Tesla car provides a charge adapter.
And caller number one, if you have more questions, you can contact Ms. Amaral directly in our transportation department, and she can give you more information. Okay, we're going to close public comment on that. All right, number 5.2, Rotunda Video Wall Concept Review. Staff report by Steven Spadowski, Deputy City Manager.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Perkins and Councilmember Rose. Good evening. The item before you is a concept review for the installation of a video wall in the City Hall Rotunda. The concept for a video wall really began to form a few years ago during an overflow meeting of the council chambers. Residents trying to view the meeting on the screen, in particular exhibit items, were unable to clearly view the meeting. In addition, the speaker system was also marginally sufficient for people to hear the proceedings over, other people talking and the ambient noise in the rotunda. A video wall would increase the overflow capacity of the rotunda, allowing for a clear view from any location in the rotunda, essentially turning it into a second or expanded capacity from the council chambers. While not in use for meetings, the wall could be used for information regarding city services and could display information on different sections of the wall. It's not just one static screen. You can actually break it up into different sections to provide different bits of information on the wall itself. The video wall could also be used as an extension of the secondary EOC here at City Hall, either displaying map information or displaying information for public debriefings. There is a dedicated source for funding for this project. Funding would come from the PEG fund, which is to only be used for capital projects related to governmental access. I do have a quick screen share here of the area to make sure that we're clear of exactly where we're talking about for the installation of this video wall. And based on the dimensions that we received the quote, let me see if it pops up here, put in a rough estimate of the size of what the video wall would look like. It would be a curved screen to match the actual curvature of the wall. The resolution would be 2560 by 1440, and it would also have replaceable sections. So it's not one contiguous screen. It actually, the technology comes in separate panels that basically have a video in, video out, and power, should any of the panels need to be replaced in the future. So that's the general overview of the concept that we've been working on. I did attach the quote to the staff report. The current PEG fund balance is roughly 1.3 million. And the quote for the video wall with installation, all the engineering and devices that would be needed to integrate with our Crestron system, plus panels to operate the wall and wireless connections to the wall would run about $300,000. So with that, I'd like to take any questions at this time.
I think it's a great idea. And I know I've talked to Joe about this in the past quite a while, but the PEG funds are kind of an interesting thing, is trying to find good uses for PEG funds when it's limited to capital only is its own challenge. And the fact that we're finding a use for those PEG funds, to me, is a big plus. I'm wondering if the new EOC can use any PEG funds, or if that's kind of off the table. But Sridhar, any questions?
So, hey, thanks, Stephen. Is this includes the audio system also, right? When we are saying video, because from past, at least couple of events that I attended, audio is not that good in Rotunda. So
yeah, and that's one of the issues. Not only that sound bar that's under the TV isn't sufficient enough of the volume. If we were to try and connect it to the speakers that are behind, it would create echo shooting from behind. So the audio connections are there. I believe they're looking at speaker options, which might add a little to the cost, but there would be speakers on either side of the screen. We looked at a speaker above the screen, but it would be too expensive to custom design something that's also curved to the wall. Speakers on the side would be off the shelf, and it would be you could direct the sound in the direction that people are standing. Also, with the audio options, included would be the ability to connect remote devices. So if we needed to connect a laptop or an iPad or whatever, you can broadcast your audio through the speakers and also the video to the screen as well. But the main function of council chamber audio, that will all connect and integrate with our Crestron system. So basically, the operators in the video room would be controlling the camera and the audio levels, and it would just broadcast seamlessly. So they tell me, if everything works, of course, out into the rotunda.
So of the topic question, can anyone rent out rotunda for any of their events? Like for when we have this kind of infrastructure like audio, video with the state of art, do we rent our rotunda for private?
Now, I know that was discussed at one point. I don't know if we've included it in any kind of fee schedule or services to the public, but that may be an option.
Oh.
Yeah, that was discussed when we built the building, and we thought, we're going to hold off on that. And there may come a time when that serves a purpose. Like if somebody's having a wedding at City Hall and it's outside of business hours, I'd kind of leave that to staff to say, that's a good idea, or yeah. But you need to be able to secure the rest of the building, with the exception of the bathrooms, so that there isn't any mischief that would occur as a result. But
recently I received one wedding event in San Francisco City Hall. Then that's quite the City Hall and quite the venue. On the speakers, I would be very careful how I directed the speakers, because it is a cylinder. One of the problems with sound is if you direct it in the wrong direction, you're going to get an echo back towards the center. You're going to have a very loud spot, and you're going to have very quiet spots. So my recommendation is you're probably going to want to point the speakers out away, and so it kind of flows through the space rather than across and then back. If you've been in rotundas before, the U.S. Capitol is kind of famous for some of that. And there's actually an interesting place where I think it was Senator Clay liked to have his desk, because he could hear conversations from across the room very, very carefully. So be careful. The acoustics can play tricks on you. Any other comments, Sri? I like the idea. So we're going to take public comment. So public comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think it sounds great, but it is very expensive, and it sounds so permanent. It sounds like once the walls are in, there is really, like nothing you can do about it. I am wondering if it's possible we can have some sort of like tarp or fabric projection. It sounds a little bit older style, but it can roll up to the ceiling, and then it can be out of sight when we need that space to be sort of just, as is. And I really don't know how frequently we need to use that area for city council meetings. If we have a history of past attendance, I don't think that we need to use that space very often, only when we have a special, like controversial agenda item where we need to use that. It seems like it will also affect the lighting that comes in right now, through all the glass windows, and from the outside, we could possibly also see like a black structure inside. I'm not so sold as a resident on how it would change the aesthetics and the look of that particular rotunda area, to be honest. But I do understand that we have the need for it when we have overflow of attendance. So I'm wondering, excuse me, if the city had looked into other options that may be cheaper, more flexible, and easier to sort of like, stash it away out of sight and, out of mind when we don't need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Stephen, I recognize that you said this could be used during city council meetings. Do we have the planning commission meetings? Are they video recorded, or do we have the video system on? Yeah, because we've
Yes.
had some overflow for planning commissions, and there have been times where we've had overflow for parks commission. So all of those play a role. We also use the current video to display information for residents as they come into City Hall, either about COVID-19, upcoming events, it's time to vote. You guys made a series of videos about the city. One of the other things, it seemed to me, when we had Ava's retirement reception there, one of her, 4 or 5 retirement meetings, that would be a fabulous place. You could show a video of a career going forward, where you have a large informal gathering in that location. I don't see hanging something from the ceiling that would then drop down, because that's a very tall ceiling. That ceiling has got to be on the order of 40 feet. And I don't see that lends itself to a drop down system there. Now, I like the video wall, and it's going to take some effort to make sure that there's useful information on it. But on those occasions where we expect to have a large gathering, I think you'll have a very good purpose. Any other comments, Sridhar?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, let's move forward, or wherever you're going to go with that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, looks like we got Candace, and one of my favorite topics, California Employers Benefit Trust. And we go back a long ways on this one, don't we, Candace? And I got to give credit to Greg Rogers and Jim Livingstone, because this started way, way back. And boy, are we in a good position today. So let's hear the story.
Good evening. So you have before you the SERP statement for June 30th, 2021. As you said, this has been established many years ago for the purpose of pre-funding retiree health benefits. So at the start of April 2021, the trust had a balance of 37 million. Since that time, there have been investment earnings of 2.2 million, expenses of about 7,200, and we did a contribution of 300,000. That left the ending balance at June 30th of 36.5 million. So based upon the most recent OPEB valuation.
You mean 39 point?
I'm sorry, 39.5 million.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, we're good.
So based upon our last actuarial valuation, which was done in 2020, our assets would have put us beyond 100% funded. But right now, we're in the process of doing a new actuarial valuation. At that point, when it's finished, we'll find out where we stand based upon what the OPEB liability is.
When do we expect to receive that analysis?
I would say within a month.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed that we're at 100 and some percent and that we won't have to make a contribution this year. Any comments? Sridhar, like I said, I want to give credit to Greg Rogers and Jim Livingstone. Jim and I were the finance committee at the time, and Greg was the finance director, administrative services director at the time. And Greg recommended this, and Jim and I discussed and analyzed it. And here we are today. We're one of, I suppose, less than a dozen cities in the state that are more than 90% funded in our OPEB. So any comments, Sridhar?
I would like to say thanks. Thanks for your visionary thinking and keeping us honest and at pretty good state that we are today. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. And Candace, please let us know when we get that analysis. I know the whole council will be interested in knowing the results of that analysis and comparing that to our balance.
Yes, I'll definitely do that.
Thank you. Any other, anything else on this?
That's
Any
all I
public
have.
comment? All right, then let's move on to the preliminary and unaudited general fund financial results. And this is our Kelly Sessions, Administrative Services Director. All right, let's hear it, Kelly.
Good evening, Finance Committee. Councilmember Veros, you picked a good day to be here because we have a lot on the agenda.
Yes, you did. You're getting well paid for this one.
So despite the pandemic, the general fund is looking pretty solid. We had a beginning fund balance of 15.3 million and an ending fund balance of 18.8 million. So a net change increase to the fund balance of 3.5 million. How did we get there? We'll break it down and go through the revenues first. On the whole, we received 47.1 million of our $52.5 million budget. So the revenue side fell $5.4 million short, but we made up for it in other ways. We had 3.4 million or 6.7% short of last year's actuals. So we still haven't made up for all of the revenues that we lost from last fiscal year, but we're primarily, and that's because of decreasing revenues in building permits and in the rec program. But if you look at the revenues, property tax is pretty solid. We had a budget of 22.2 million, actuals of 21.9. So we are short there just by 364,000 or 1.6 million. We'll just hit some of the highlights here. Sales and use tax, a budget of 9.5. This is kind of the bright spot. We actually collected 10.8, and so we were $1.3 million, 13% over collected on the sales tax side. Jumping down to transient occupancy taxes, TOT, budget of 2.6, receipts of 768,000. So this one really hurt us. We are short 1.8 million short of budget, and that's about 70% of the budget. It was basically close to what we did last year. We increased the budget over last year by 300,000, but I think probably at the time we did not anticipate that COVID would be going on so long, and so that just caught us short on that. And we know that the hotel and travel industry just has not picked up the way that we were hoping that it would.
I noticed before you go further that the property transfer tax, big bump up. Lots of houses moving out there at very good prices, I might add.
Yeah, that can only benefit us later on.
Yes, because that'll show up in the property tax moving forward.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, a big jump there. It was a nice bump of over 50% of larger than what we had expected. I didn't address that one just because the dollar amount was smaller.
Yeah, dollar amount's modest, but
right.
Yeah.
So jumping down to franchise fees, we had a budget of 6.1 and we brought in 5.4 million. We're about 10% short of budget, 622,000. That is due to, let's see, we increased our budget by about 540,000. No, we had a $540,000 increase over last year. So our receipts were up 8.8%, but by the same token, we also increased our budget by 20%. So we expected more to come in than what actually came in. But that is a positive. We're at least on the receipt side, the actual side, we're moving in the right direction. Licenses and permits, budget of 2.4. We took in 1.9. We're $450,000 short, about 19% underfunded there. And that's just due to COVID, building permits being down, and just a slowdown in construction. And then jumping down to charges for service, $5.3 million budget, 3.3 million in receipts. Again, we're short 2 million there, so that's a fairly significant shortfall of 38.5%. Last year, we collected 5.3 million. So we kind of expected, I think, that we would match that on the budget side. But because of the building permits being down, or building being down, and also primarily the recreation programs being nearly completely shut down, we didn't pick up all of that rec fees for service, the theater, special events, youth teen programs, and sports. So those are the highlights on the revenue side. If we jump down to the expenditure side, on the whole, we spent 48 million of our $50.5 million budget. So we were under budget by 2.5 million or 5%. This helped to save us on the shortfall on the revenue side. Last year, we spent about 45.5 million or 2.4 million more at 5.5%. So the good news is that every department was under budget. The biggest contributors to expenditure savings in this case was Police Department, Public Works, and Parks and Community Services. So we'll just take a quick look at those three. Police, they spent 15.1 million of their $15.8 million budget, and they were 4.7% under budget. That's primarily due to vacancy savings from positions that they had. They spent a little bit less in some dispatch fees, and also significantly less in their training budget. They just were not getting out to do as much training because of COVID. Public Works spent 14.7 million of their $15 million budget. So they came in at about $313,000 under budget, 2.1%. Not percentage-wise, not a lot, but it certainly helps the bottom line. They had some position vacancies and special event cancellations, saved some money there. In addition to savings because of reduced janitorial and maintenance in our facilities, and a reduction in just supplies, things like pool chemicals and other things that normally would have had to be spent and replenished throughout the summer months. And then lastly, a lot of utility savings as well, gas, electric, water, et cetera. Again, of course, all of this is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then lastly, Parks and Community Services. They spent $6.6 million of their $7.8 million budget, resulting in savings of $1.2 million. And that was the big savings, 15.7% under budget. They had an analyst position and an office specialist position that they did not fill because of COVID, as well as all of the temporary salaries that normally would have been paid out to support the events and all of the class registrations. And then also lastly, we saved some money on the county library expense because the library is closed for so many months. The county reduced its library service bill. So let's see, with all of that, at the end of the day, as I said, we added money. We added 3.5 million net reserves to the fund balance, and that equates to 39.6% of our estimated expenditures. So we are above the 36% reserve level per the policy. So we're in good shape, and hopefully the audit, we're starting the audit in the next 2 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks now, but hopefully we'll continue to have good news going forward.
I guess that audit coming up is why Candace is smiling so much, right? Always. No, this is good news, and obviously a lot of work went into keeping our expenditures in check and not spending where we didn't need to, but providing great services. I got copies of the annual report and 43,000 meals delivered and things like that, and answering the phone, for 3,000 plus, and doing all those things and all the police work and all the public works and keeping the lights on. And I think the city did a fabulous job, and Joe, you deserve a lot of credit because you're in charge, but your staff really supported you here and done an outstanding job all around. I'm really pleased. And hopefully we'll have good numbers when the audit is complete. But, the numbers have never really changed that much from the preliminary to the audit. I know there's a couple of things will get booked in a different way, but we've never seen big changes even at the 0.5% level. So I'm really pleased. Thank you very much. Sridhar, comment?
I echo your comments. Yeah, thanks, Joe and your team, for a fantastic job on this, especially during COVID-19. Many cities are struggling, but then whereas San Ramon, our budgets are pretty strong. So thanks for all your great work. On sales and use tax, one question I have is, are we back to our pre-COVID numbers, or is it like more than that? I didn't get a chance to look at the previous numbers.
So on the sales tax side, we are not quite back to pre-COVID numbers. Last year we had, I take that back. We are over our pre-COVID numbers. So Last year, we took in 10.4 million, and this year we took in 10.7. So we are just above where we were last fiscal year.
Sounds good. Great. Thank you.
Okay. I see we have a caller, so public comment is open.
Hi, could you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, so I'm wondering, your fiscal year starts in January or September?
June, or it starts in July, goes from July to June.
Okay, so then I'm curious as to why all the property movements didn't seem to have drastic impact on the property tax column. It doesn't make sense.
That's because the property tax bill that you get in November, okay, didn't change last year. Okay, these things property takes about a year to reflect in our income. Is that close to it, Kelly?
Yeah, that's about right. Mhm.
So things that happened in March, April through July and June and all that when did they close the books on the year? What is it, like the end of August, the end of September, somewhere around there, they close the property valuations and then they send out the bills so that you can pay your property tax in November.
Yeah, I think that's like early August to mid-August is when they
Yeah.
start sending that out.
Yeah,
When it
so
has to be
So
finalized.
valuations that happen prior to the beginning of August will show up in the November. And then we get our first payment in December, right? And we get our second payment in, was it May?
April or May, can't,
Yeah,
April.
I pay my
April.
tax in April, so it's usually a month later.
Yeah, we get it in April and
Oh.
then June,
Okay. Oh, then you get the final in June, right?
right?
So you get a December and April, and then a final in June.
And there is just a secured payment in October. It's not very large.
Yeah. So those things that happened before August will show up in this next time around. And so things that happened back in the spring and January and all that, we'll see them next year. Okay?
Okay, so then that concludes, so that brings me to ask my next question. Does the staff predict or expect that all the positive movement in the sales, in the property sales category is going to cover, should there continue to be a stagnation in our parks and, the sales, the regular sales you said is already up to par, but if COVID continues to plague us, do you anticipate that all the positive movements in the property sales is going to cover us?
well, I would say, first of all, we need to recognize that this report that we just gave is for fiscal year 1920. I mean,
2021.
2021. So it ended on June 30th. We haven't really done the projections for the end of this fiscal year. We in detail. So that will happen at mid-year. And until then, we do expect that these trends will hold. There's nothing, at least that we see on the horizon, that would be a big change, a big negative change to the economy or to the city revenues versus where we're already at with COVID. So we think it should hold pretty steady.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, does that do it for 5.4?
Yes, sir.
Sridhar?
Yep, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to 5.5. Proposal to upgrade authorized office specialist position in accounts payable to a general accountant position in the finance division. And Kelly, you're back on again.
Okay. So part of our finance division responsibility is to, of course, do accounts payable and accounts receivable, process all the monies that come in and all the monies that go out. For years, this function has been managed by 3 different full-time equivalents, FTEs. But we've had a lot of change in the city recently with the Munis implementation, our new financial system. Some of those processes have been streamlined and improved, but it has also created some other complexities that require more management of Munis as a system, and also more management at month end and year end times in order to keep the system accurate. There is also a heavy burden at the senior administrative analyst level when we're in budget season. It takes a whole lot of work to prepare the budget and then to publish it. And then same thing is true for the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. So we had we had one resignation in the office specialist position, plus one office specialist who left and was promoted into another department. So we saw this as an opportunity to kind of reevaluate a little bit. And we believe that the bulk of those accounts payable and accounts receivable functions can be handled by 2 office specialists. What we really need now is a higher level duty position, which we're classifying as an accountant, in order to do some of those higher level of work. The accountant position would be someone who would have a 4-year degree, would be capable of doing more independent analysis and evaluation. And then they'd be able to assist with all of those duties that I was talking about previously in terms of preparing journal entries and helping to reconcile general ledger and the subsidiary accounts and preparing monthly financial statements. So again, the lower level class is more processing of those things. The accountant level would be more on the management analysis and of those items. Some of the time, the accountant may still be required to do some of the AP processing, in a pinch, but we're hopeful that the 2 could manage it by themselves. A second benefit of upgrading this position is that we currently have no path through the finance department for someone who wanted to stay in finance and promote up. Once you're at the office specialist position, you really kind of hit the ceiling there. And in order to, what we see as that happens pretty regularly, people do a year or 2, maybe 3 years as an office specialist, and then they start looking to become a program coordinator in another department. So this provides an opportunity for people to move up and stay within the finance division and, make a career of it. That hopefully will help with some of our retention issues. So in order to make this happen, we have enough funding in the current fiscal year. Next fiscal year, the cost is going to be about $27,600 that we could add to the budget. So this item is also on the council agenda for tomorrow. Just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. So if you want to pull it back for some reason, we can certainly do that, but we're hoping that you'll approve.
So there's no additional funding required in 21-22, but it will be included in the 22-23 budget and beyond.
Correct.
Thank you. No, I think this is great for a couple of reasons here. One, you obviously make a case for the higher level of skill for the position. And it is nice to know that there is a potential for a step up if you're looking for that kind of career. So I'm for it. Any comment, Sridhar?
Oh, I'm good with it.
Okay.
You do
Thank
have a
you.
hand raised.
Yeah, we have okay. Let's have public comment, and as soon as you get the no longer muted, we can hear you. Go.
Okay, can you hear me really before I speak?
Yes, we
Okay,
can hear
great.
you. We've heard you every time. Whether it's a
Okay.
council meeting or it's a finance committee meeting or other meetings, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I have these questions. So it doesn't sound like there is any budget impact this year, and it will piggyback onto the future year budget, but there is no listing of how much the budget is. Number two, I'm wondering if this position, because the presenter, Mr. Sessions, said that it's a independent position. So does it mean that the person works remotely and pretty much like isolated? And where would you advertise for this position? Does this position require American citizenship? Does this position have the authority to move money around? Or is it strictly just like a computing, reporting type of position? My pet peeve, as a resident is just that it doesn't sound very secure when someone works independently, has all these power, and also is able to move money and produce the reports to the council members. That is a very bad formula. Thank you.
Kelly, you want to comment?
Sure. Mr. Vice Mayor Perkins,
Yes.
I would recommend that given all these questions, some of the statements are completely inaccurate. It'd be easier to have the call-in user contact Mr. Sessions
Correctly. That's
tomorrow,
fine.
and he can easily provide better clarification.
Great. And then they can go back and forth on questions and answers. Fine. So caller, if you would contact Mr. Sessions at his office, he will be glad to answer your questions.
Sure. Mhm.
All right. Anything else, Sridhar? Can we move on? Are we recommending that we send this to the council?
Yes.
Okay, let's move it to the council. All right. Oh, now here comes more fun. Kelly, we've got the new guy and his new policies.
Okay, yes, we like policies.
Yes, we do like policies. Because then you know when
Policies.
you're in compliance and you're out of compliance.
Yes, they keep us straight. They give us direction, so they're good things. We have two policies before you tonight that are it's been a long time since they've been updated, and so they are in need. The travel policy and also the cell phone use and stipend policy. So let's first talk about the travel policy. It was last amended in 2008. And so we went through and made a lot of just updating language and clarifications just to clean it up. I'll hit some of the significant policy changes that are different. You have before you both a red line version and a non-red line version, so you can kind of track and follow along where these changes happen. We added a section of definitions for the policy. We added a section describing non-permissible expenses, just so it's more crystal clear if someone is wondering what they can spend money on. Hopefully the non-permissible can help clarify that. We made changes to reflect just some of the temporary technologies and procedures that, like ride sharing that did not exist in 2008. Well, that's a legitimate expense. So we added that type of thing to the policy. We reorganized a lot of the paragraphs. And then the biggest change, the major change, was the addition of an option to use a per diem expense reimbursement model for overnight travel rather than just the actual expense reimbursement, submitting receipts. So how does it work? Basically, rather than if you go on an overnight travel, your airplane travel, your conference expense, none of that changes. This just applies to the meal and incidental reimbursement expense. So instead of, if you're going out to a dinner and, breakfast, lunch, whatever, normally in the past, you've always had to keep your receipts. You submit those receipts and you get reimbursed based on actual expense. The per diem model instead provides a daily stipend to cover the meals for that day. It's based on Federal General Services Administration guidelines, and it complies with the IRS tax code. And in fact, they do update that stipend annually. So we have set a stipend. Normally, the traveler has to look up the exact geographic location of the conference, and then that tells how much the stipend is available for that particular day and how much each meal is worth. We wanted to simplify it and just make it as easy as possible. So we're just offering a single California rate that would apply or comply with IRS guidelines. We'll update this amount annually as we do the mileage reimbursement rate. So all we have to do is log into the federal website and see what the new the new stipend rates are. The one thing that you all will be interested in is, because elected officials are prohibited from receiving any kind of funding that would be considered additional expense to what you get, what's posted online, anything that could be construed to be compensation. So this new per diem stipend will not apply to you. You will still be required to follow the actual reimbursement expense process. The best and biggest benefits of this thing are in the time savings. Normally, when you go on a trip and you're gone for a few days, you've got to hunt down all your receipts, and then they have to be pasted up onto a sheet of paper, and a lot of paperwork to fill out and submit, and then someone has to review and approve. All of that will be avoided by having this per diem policy. And this, in fact, came to us at the request of the police department, just because they were spending so much time with all of their training, having to go through this expense reimbursement process. Because we do have a travel ordinance, this is an addition to the travel ordinance. So we would, if this policy goes forward and it's approved by council, then likewise, we would be coming back to the council with a change to the ordinance to mirror what the new travel policy states. So with that, do you have any questions?
Not a question. I just want to point out that back in 2008 or before, I recommended this model. This was what I experienced when I was traveling with the Navy. They had except they did it city by city, because the Navy is literally all over the world. So we used the federal, reimbursement schedule for hotels, and then they had one for the per diem rates. And then Livermore Lab adopted the same thing. And I said, why are we spending all this time tracking down receipts and making our accounting staff verify receipts if they want to verify receipts, and audits and all that kind of stuff? I said, this is just time wasted. And so I'm glad to see we've finally come into the real world here, that this is so much easier for everybody. And the fact that you say, okay, if you leave before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, okay. That first day, it kind of gets chopped up a little bit. And the last day can kind of get chopped up a little bit, but the rates are there and the time, it's easy to figure out. It really is. It's easy for the traveler to figure out. It's easier for the staff to figure out. Yes, let's move it. Let's go with this. And I recognize if the rules don't allow council members, we'll still collect our receipts and you guys will still figure that out. That's fine. Sridhar, anything on the travel policy?
I'm good. I think this reduce the headaches of getting the receipts, clarifying that I go through at my workplace all this time. So it's painful on both sides. I feel like we are just wasting a lot of time and energy. So this sounds good.
And you know what? If somebody wants to eat 3 meals a day at McDonald's, for $18 or whatever, and they get to make $35 on their per diem, okay, that's okay. So what, right?
Yep.
All right, let's move on to the cell phone use.
Okay, cell phone use and stipends. This policy was last amended in 2013, and we all know how quickly technology changes, so it's time to update this one. The major change here is that this policy also provides a stipend rather than a reimbursement. So currently, if you are using your personal cell phone in the conduct of city business and you have been approved for that use, then every month you're supposed to submit your cell phone bill. You would have a purchase order that was set up for you, and each month the city would be cutting a check to you for reimbursement of that usage, and it's at $40. What this proposes to do instead is those employees who have been approved, they would receive their $40 payment through the payroll system rather than through the accounts payable system. So there is no check to cut each month. Again, there's no bill to submit for reimbursement. It really benefits the employee in that the employee doesn't have to spend all this time submitting for reimbursement. It really benefits the city because the city doesn't have to cut a check every month to these individuals.
The downside is those employees that get this reimbursement now will have to pay tax on it.
That is the downside.
Yeah, and so you're losing 20 or 30% of that $40 to taxes.
True. There are quite a few employees who don't even submit just because they say it's not worth it. So hopefully, maybe this will work out better for them. There are those employees who do not use a personal cell phone for city business. They have a city issued cell phone, maybe you're in the police department and you have a separate city issued cell phone. That aspect of it does not change anything that they do. They'll just continue working as they have always been. The policy also clarifies how cell phones can be used or not used off duty so that we stay in compliance with FLSA guidelines for non-exempt employees. And it identifies the risk to the employees if they happen to use a personal cell phone and then they are conducting city business using text messaging or other written forms of messaging. That would open up their cell phone to being discoverable during investigations of legal disputes or Public Records Act requests. So that just is a warning that's part of the policy. And I would say that those are the major highlights.
I think this is a great idea that, like you said, it solves some finance department issues. It helps many employees that are currently not being reimbursed. It will have some impact on those members that are currently getting a reimbursement check because they'll now have to pay taxes on it. I would like the city manager working with the administrative services director to review the price point on that to see if it's still the right price point given the tax implications. But the policy is fine, and I think it's a positive.
Okay,
Yeah, same again. It makes sense. Just let's make sure that it won't be a big implication or impact on the tax wise for the employees, so that but based on $40, I don't think it should be significant, but just let's make sure.
Well, instead of getting $40, it means you're getting about $25.
That's right. So
I know it's not big. For some people, it might impact them more. Okay. Anything else on that one? Oh, we have a caller. Okay, public comment.
Okay, I know you can hear me, so I'm going to go ahead and
Yes,
speak.
keep going.
Okay, so Mr. Sessions, I have the following questions. On your report, you had stated that the impact of the per diem reimbursement is unknown. So I'm wondering, should it become like out of our current budget? Does it come out of our general fund, or does it come out of department fund? Because you mentioned that the police department seems to be heavily affected by the per diem. So then if that's the case, I would encourage you to please take that into consideration and make sure you increase their next year's fiscal, police budget to be able to accommodate the increase. Otherwise, if they should go negative, then you're going to have to come before the council and ask for money. So please just keep that in mind. And I think it's unfair when you are really reimbursing the city staff and they are already working for the government and you're asking them to pay taxes. That goes to what, the state or the federal? I think the city should pay those taxes. In other words, if their cell phone costs, expenses are $40, and by paying them $40, they have to pay $10 taxes, then those $10 taxes should be paid for by our city budget. Thank you.
you're muted, Council Member Perkins.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead, Kelly.
No, I just said that you were muted. I couldn't.
Okay.
Couldn't hear what you were saying.
Sridhar, any further comments, or we'll recommend we move these things forward?
yeah,
One clarification, excuse me, was that the cell phone policy is an administrative policy. So we're just kind of seeking any input you may have on that one. The travel policy is one that by state law has to go to council for review and approval. So we would be taking that one back to council.
Okay. I recommend we move forward on both of them.
yes, I'm good with it.
Okay. All right. Okay, our last fun for the evening, and it's Kelly Sessions again. Pension expense reduction strategy. Okay.
Okay, this is the big one. So basically, Christina, were you going to promote? Okay. As the new person in town, naturally, I'm looking for ways that we can save money and have an impact on the budget and improve the city's financial situation. And so one of the things that I was interested in doing was looking at our pension expense. In the past, the city has already looked at pension expense more than once and in multiple ways. We issued pension obligation bonds in 2010. When the state introduced PEPRA pension reform in 2012, the city also created a second-tier pension program. In other words, a reduced pension benefit for employees. And then also we created a trust fund with the Public Agency Retirement Services, also known as PARS, in which we set aside funds for any future pension expense. So I was looking at those things and wondering if there were ways to save money or to set money aside for future pension expense. And when I saw that we had 2010 pension obligation bonds, I got pretty excited thinking, oh, that sounds like it's ripe for a refinancing and we could save a lot of money. Unfortunately, those bonds have what's called a make whole provision in them. So they are not eligible for refunding throughout the life of the bonds. And then we started looking at just the idea that perhaps issuing a new series of pension obligation bonds to pay off our new unfunded accrued liability, the UAL, and decided that that idea had some real merit. So the city belongs to CalPERS. You know that we have a defined benefit program. Throughout an employee's career, we are setting aside funding to pay for their future pension expenses. And that's called, that ongoing cost, we call the normal cost. Sometimes, however, things happen in the market where, maybe we have COVID, or we have the Great Recession, the home mortgage industry melts down. And then all of a sudden, those calculations that we had done to cover all of that future expense, we find out that those are not sufficient in order to fund the retirement of these employees. That deficit gets passed, and CalPERS is the one that's doing all of those calculations. That deficit gets passed along to cities in the form of this unfunded accrued liability, the UAL. And so then the UAL, that extra cost, gets added to the normal cost, and the city has to pay for both of those. The rate that the city pays on the UAL, because it's mortgaged out over many years, the annual rate that we pay is 6.8%. And that bill is due and payable to CalPERS, and we do that on an annual basis. Each July, we pay a good chunk of change to pay that bill down. The city owes UAL on both of our miscellaneous plans and both the safety plans. And the combined debt is 47.8 million. That is a lot of money, but actually the city is in better shape than most cities. What we say is that is a funded ratio of about 81 to 82%. In other words, we have 81 to 82% of the money that we need to pay for future pension liability. Most cities are down around 70. Some cities are in the 60%. Most are down in the low 70s, maybe mid 70s. So we're actually better off than most. So what are pension obligation bonds? A pension obligation bond is like refinancing a home mortgage. You may owe money on your mortgage at one interest rate, but if you can borrow at a lower interest rate, then you take out this new loan and pay off the old loan, and then you start making your principal and interest payments at a much lower rate. The city has the ability to borrow funds, we call them pension obligation bonds, at this lower interest rate. And this lower cost, the cost in today's bond market, we can issue pension obligation bonds at less than 3% cost per annually. And that will save us hundreds of thousands of dollars annually and even millions of dollars over the course of the lifetime of these bonds. Doing so, issuing bonds, as with everything, comes with a risk. And pension obligation bonds also are considered, to have some risk. So much so that in 2015, it goes without saying that we need to bring this to your attention. The GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, in 2015 issued a statement recommending that local agencies not issue pension obligation bonds for a variety of reasons. And so I asked a trusted financial advisor, Stephen Gordler, he has joined us on the panel, to run an analysis to see what the pension obligation bonds would look like if we were to issue them. And he has run some different scenarios. We believe that we can structure these pension obligation bonds in a way that it will mitigate all of GFOA's reasons to not issue pension obligation bonds. And that would allow us to move forward in confidence. So why would GFOA say not to issue that statement, or not to issue pension obligation bonds? First and foremost is the interest rate risk. Issuing bonds is a long-term investment, typically 30 years, but in this case, we're only looking out 20 years. A lot can happen in those 20 years with the economy. Things can go from bad to worse. And primarily what happens, we talked about the CalPERS debt rate of being at 6.8%. CalPERS could feasibly lower its discount rate to a rate less than what our bonds are, meaning that they would end up costing us more than had we just done nothing and stayed with PERS. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when we look at some slides. The next thing that GFOA says is that these are very complex instruments with inherent risk. Some of them have complex underlying embedded investments from such things as derivatives or swaps, and they recommend staying away from anything that is complicated like that, that can have just inherent risk by itself. Thirdly, when we issue bonds, that is another bonded debt. So it takes up part of the city's bonding capacity. And there's really no way around that except to say that, we would be saving money. Yes, it would take up some of our bonded capacity, but we would be saving cash at the same time. Next, GFOA says that bonds, pension obligation bonds, should be funded such that they do not extend the length of the debt. If you, for instance, have heard about some company that was going into bankruptcy, they may restructure all of their debt, and what used to be a 30-year debt gets spread out over 40 or 50 years. That does lower the cash going out the door initially, but over the long term, it ends up costing a lot more that way. So we would need to structure the deals not to do that. And lastly, GFOA says that the rating agencies may not look positively on a pension obligation bond as a credit risk if we were looking to, if we had some sort of budgetary constraints, we weren't able to meet our payments. And so kind of as a a last ditch effort where we're restructuring some of our debt and trying to just lower payments. But again, we're not in that situation. We don't have to address a budgetary shortfall here. We're just taking advantage of an opportunity in the bond market. So Mr. Gortler put together his analysis and mentioned a couple of issues that were most critical to the success of a good pension obligation bond. One is good timing, and that is that the pension rate would be much lower than the rate that we get on the bonds is much lower than the rate that we would pay at PERS. This is called the spread. We should have at least a 2 or 3% spread. We'll talk about that again when we see some of the slides. And then structure the debt should be structured in payments to meet all of these GFOA concerns. And so we will be able to do that. Christina, could you pull up the analysis? It would start on page 105 of the agenda. And I apologize ahead of time. I added some detail to all of this explanation, knowing that Sridhar was getting thrown in here at the last minute and didn't have a chance to review all these materials. So we're trying to take it a little bit slow here.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly.
There we go. Okay, so next slide, please.
Quick question. By definition, the CalPERS is our debt associated with CalPERS is not amortized. Is that correct? We make annual payments, but and it's not an amortized. It's not like an amortized loan, whereas a pension obligation bond is fully amortized.
I believe that is correct. Stephen, is that your understanding? You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's useful to think of the debt that you owe CalPERS to be, I think of it as an amortizing debt. You have a $47 million debt that you owe CalPERS, and then they charge you interest at the rate of 6.8% per year. And that amortizes over a period of roughly, call it about 20 years. So from just a purely financial standpoint, it has the same characteristics as a debt. You pay principal and interest. I mean, maybe there's other ways of looking at it, but that's the way I would look at it.
Okay, continue on with your presentation then.
Okay, thank you. So this first slide is just to show that we're not the only local government agency that is considering doing this. Over the past year, there's been about 35 cities and counties and 3 special districts that have issued pension obligation bonds totaling over $5.2 billion. Next slide.
Do we know anything about the rates associated with those?
Yes, we can get all of the rates that each one of those deals had.
Are those rates dependent upon, like we have a, was it Moody's or Standard & Poor's AAA? And so does that play a role? And is that the rate that the lenders would assume, or is that the rating, or that would we get the best of the best rates being a AAA rated city?
Yeah, maybe I can address that. So that's an absolutely critical point that you make. Borrowers such as the city that have the highest credit ratings are much more in demand. Their bonds are much in greater demand, and they get significantly lower interest rates. Those borrowers who have sketchy credit, who are not highly rated, pay a significant penalty in today's market, a bond issued by a highly rated borrower such as yourself would probably attain an interest rate of between 2.5 and 3%, whereas a weaker credit, a less creditworthy borrower, they might pay a premium, a penalty, if you will, of anywhere 25 to 50 to 75 basis points over that rate that you would pay. And that may not sound like a lot, but if you compound that over 20 years,
Yep.
it adds up to a very considerable amount of interest.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is historical interest rate trends, the 10-year US Treasury note. The municipal bond market follows the US Treasury yields, and Treasury notes are at the lowest point since 1965, the beginning of this graph. You can see that, it's just visually. I actually did some research and found another graph that went all the way back to 1900, and interest rates on US Treasuries are still lower than at any point since 1900. So this is a very, very good market environment for issuing bonds.
Okay.
Next slide. So let's look at the 2010 pension obligation bond. It was issued in January 2010. The original par amount was 17.6 million. Of that, we still owe 14.6 million on it. If I recall back from April at our budget hearing, I think Vice Chair Perkins, you mentioned, why do we still owe so much on this? And it's because of the structure, the way that that deal was structured. The bonds finally mature in June of 2039. And the interest rate that we're paying on that, what's called the all-in true interest cost, that would include the cost of issuance plus the, what is it?
That's really the broadest measure of the
Yeah.
cost. It takes into account the interest that you pay to investors, as well as the cost of issuance that you paid to the consultants and the attorneys and so forth
Yeah.
at the time the bonds were first issued.
Right.
So in the broadest measure, it's 6.68% is the rate that you incurred to borrow that money.
Yes, so thank you. If we were to redeem those bonds today, we would have to spend $21.3 million to make it all go away.
And I assume you can calculate the sum of all of our future payments as well? And does it?
Yes,
I
in
assume it
fact,
makes
that's
no sense to try and redeem it under any circumstance.
right. You have about $25 million of total principal plus interest remaining on that 2010 bond. And if you wanted to pay it all off today, you would pay 21 million, which is essentially the present value of all the future payments discounted back to today.
Right. Okay.
Right. I make one observation, if I could, Kelly.
Sure.
Back in 2010, when you issued those bonds, it was very common to have this kind of make whole redemption provision where it precludes you from paying off the debt early and gaining any advantage. That's no longer the case. The market has evolved over time, and now the standard provision that you see on all of these types of bonds is what we call a 10-year par call, which means at the end of 10 years, you could pay off the bonds with no penalty, just simply pay off the amount of unpaid principal, which in this case is only $14 million. And then you're out of the deal altogether. So as you can see, back in 2010, the deal that you struck was particularly unfavorable in the sense that the interest rate was very high and it didn't allow you the option of getting out of the deal early.
Yeah, it was good in the fact that it was cheaper than CalPERS and it was fully amortized. And so there was a spread. The spread wasn't as good as what we potentially are looking at today. But the spread was sufficient to at least our very conservative finance director of Greg Rogers was in favor and made convincing arguments.
Sure,
It wasn't a bad deal. It just, in retrospect, it wasn't as good a deal.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see how that worked out. So the deal was structured the first 5 years or so at 4%. And at that point in time, the discount rate at PERS was 7.75%. Over the course of years, the discount rate has drifted down to 6.8%. And so now that the cost of the POBs at the true cost at 6.6% is just a hair below what the PERS discount rate is. So we would want to make sure that that spread between those lines is very significant. Yeah. Much wider than this, so that we just feel confident with it.
Okay.
So let's go to the next slide, please. Now, this is a comparison of the 2010 POBs versus what the 2021s could look like. And this is really kind of an exciting slide. If you look in the first section there, the 2010 POBs, the first columns, the principal payment principal payment is 17.6 million at the bottom. In the yellow there, the interest payment to borrow 17.6 million is $22.3 million. If you look over on the 2021 side, the cost of borrowing $30.4 million, so almost double the amount of the bonds, is only approximately $7 million. So it's about 1/3 the interest cost of the 2010 deals. So it just kind of gives you some context for how the market has changed and how much money can be saved.
So that total debt service column, those are the payments that that would be the total payment. How does that compare with the payment we make in July?
We'll see that slide a little later.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, next slide. So this is if CalPERS were to drop the discount rate to 6.5%, we fully expect them to do that in November. In fact, they may go below that. They may go to 6.25%, possibly even 6%. We still would be significantly under the spread, at least 3.5% under, we think, would be a good range, and in some instances, possibly even more. So
it would be a financial disaster for CalPERS to drop their rates into the 5s. The cities right and left would be going bankrupt to try and make their payments if CalPERS decided to go into the 5s. In fact, they're going to cause a lot of stress if they go to 6.25.
Yeah, there will be a lot of pressure on CalPERS not to go too low, as there historically has been. Right. And that's why they've kind of propped up their discount rate for so many years.
So is Kelly, is that discount, CalPERS discount rate is, my understanding was based on how the stock market as well as the financial market is doing, right? So is there any reason why we think that it is keep going to drop? I was thinking that things are going so good within the market other than the interest rates. Any reason why?
Well, things are going excellent in the market. Last fiscal year, CalPERS had a return of 21.3%.
Right.
That return was so good that it triggered an automatic rate reduction. They've had this kind of artificially high discount rate for several years. And so they put a policy in place that if they had stellar returns above a certain amount, that it would automatically lower the discount rate for the next fiscal year, because it's a good opportunity. Because they made so much that year, it's a good opportunity to lower the discount rate going forward.
And it's not just the stock market, because they own properties. So
Right.
it's real estate, it's bonds, it's cash, it's all kinds of things, not just the stock market, though that is a major portion.
Yeah, but stock, real estate, everything, I mean, bond market maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I expect that they may be, like, they should be doing much, much better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can I make one quick observation there? Historically, CalPERS, like all other large pension funds, have relied extensively on purchasing long-term fixed income securities such as treasury bonds and the like as a mainstay of their portfolio. It provides a assured rate of return and a high degree of safety and liquidity. But what we've seen in the last couple of years and going forward, what we expect to see is continued very low interest rates. And so that puts an enormous pressure on pension funds to try and find income elsewhere, because they can't get any money by buying treasury bonds. So now they're looking at diversifying their portfolio, buying more equities, using leverage, doing all sorts of things to try and increase their earnings to make up for the loss that they no longer can get on fixed income. So it's a delicate balance that they're trying to make, and there will continue to be downward pressure on their earnings as long as interest rates remain this low, and as long as they continue to be cautious about the degree of risk that they're willing to take.
Okay,
Concur. Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, next slide, please. So this is, there's a lot of numbers on here. If we just kind of look at the combined total column, we would be refunding 29.2 million of UA. Well, let's see, I'm getting confused here.
No, that's
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, we'd be
Why
refunding.
not
29
why not the
point-
full 37?
Because if you overfund, then you are stranding your investment in a way that you can't really get it back. So you don't want to overfund. You want to get close, but leave a little bit of extra so that you don't hit the 100% funding rate.
Okay, because if you, in effect, give CalPERS all your money, you don't get anything back if you're overfunded. If
Right,
for some
you get
reason you
nothing in
become
return.
you become 105% funded, they're not going to give you anything extra to go with that. Okay.
Right, your 5% is stuck there and you don't get anything out of it.
Okay.
Just to discourage, that's a discouraging thing.
Well, yeah, honestly, once you get over 90-something%, once again, you're going to be in the few percent of the cities. But then, of course, we've got this pension obligation bonds, which, as Mr. Bornstein, Dan Bornstein with the Times will gladly point out to you that is part of your pension debt. Your total pension debt is your pension obligation bonds plus your unfunded ratio, your unfunded liability.
Right. And so the unfunded liability, for total transparency purposes, we would not be paying off all of the unfunded amount. We would still have 18.6 million approximately left. And but that equates to, again, 92% of our total unfunded accrued liability. And Stephen, if I ever say anything that is incorrect, feel free to jump in. So next slide, please. Let's look at what this could possibly look like. We have 4 different scenarios of ways to structure these bonds. And this scenario number 1, over the life of the bond, would save $12.8 million approximately. You can see that the way that it's structured, is level payments. So that dotted line equals the payment amount. We start out where basically what the city would be owing in 2022, and then just lop off all of that extra interest. And so all of that becomes savings. Anything above the dotted line becomes savings. And then at the point in time.
Okay, so the total height of the column is what we would be paying to CalPERS.
Correct.
But the dotted line is what we would be paying for the 29 million associated with the 29 million. And the dotted line is the debt payment associated with the 29 million.
Right. So the vertical bars represent principal and interest that we owe to CalPERS for UAL. And the dotted
Is that for
line,
the whole 47 UAL, or is that for just the 29 million piece of it?
That's just for the piece that we're contemplating refunding, $29 million.
Okay. So there, what's not on the graph is the amount we owe on the 18 million.
Correct.
Okay.
okay. And so this one gives level payments until it drops off. And once the PERS rates start to drop off as well, then you'll see the interest rate just mirrors that amount and reflects it all the way down. It actually cuts a couple of years off of the full amortization schedule that PERS would be charging us.
Okay.
So that's kind of what scenario 1 would look like. Let's go to scenario 2. Scenario 2 saves 10.5 million over the life of the bonds. It also has level payments. You'll see that it drops a little bit more significantly at the beginning of the amortization schedule, and then it extends above the rate beginning in 2038. So we would actually be spending more at the end of the life of these bonds than what we normally would have with PERS. So this gives more savings up front, levels the payments out longer, reduces your total savings, and you end up paying more at the end. So next slide, let's look at scenario number 3. This scenario is the one that produces the most savings. It just mirrors exactly what the PERS rate is, cuts a few years off of the amortization schedule, and has the most savings at 14.2 million. The drawback is you don't get to have the nice budget feature of having level payments for so many years. Let's go to scenario 4. And this does basically the same as scenario 2, but a little steeper interest towards the end. So bigger savings up front, larger payments at the end. It reduces the total savings amount by a little bit over scenario 2. So it's 9.5 million. And so if you go to the next slide, we can kind of see what these 4 look like all together. Again, 1, level payments, 2, level payments, but save more upfront, lose more at the end, spend more at the end. Scenario 3, mirror the PERS rate exactly. And scenario 4, more significant savings up front, higher costs at the end. Let's go to the next slide. This next few slides here, Vice Chair Perkins will address the question that you had. So this talks about what the annual savings would be. If you look at, for instance, in fiscal year 2022, we would have spent 2.2 million on principal and interest if we put our money with PERS. Under the pension obligation bonds, we spend the same amount of money, 2.2 million, so we save all of $154. But in 2023, you start seeing some of that interest rate difference. And so there's a savings of over $500,000. That increases up to 2027, where we're saving 1.3 million. And we save significant, at least $500,000 annually, all the way down to 2035. Once we hit 2037, you'll notice that's where that graph starts to mirror and drop off to follow what the PERS cost would be. So total annual savings there, $12.8 million. Scenario 2. Again, this is the more savings up front and higher cost at the end. You'll see there's savings in 2023 of almost 800,000, and then over $1 million savings all the way up through 2033. But when you hit 2038, then you start spending more than what you normally would have. Up into 2042, you're spending 1.4 million more than what the normal cost would be. So total there is 10.5 million in savings. Scenario 3. This scenario, because the rates mirror the PERS rate, you don't have the same amount, the same level payments throughout the life of the bonds, but your savings is basically level. So it's set up to save about $700,000 per year, starting in 2023 and going all the way through 2041. And so this one results in savings of 14.2 million. And let's see scenario number 4. Again, same thing as kind of scenario number 2, but a little steeper curve at the beginning and at the end. So you save more upfront, over $1 million in 2023. That goes for 10 years. It starts to drop off, but in 2037, then you're spending more than what you would normally on the UAL, and that pretty much goes all the way to the end. So if you
I
want
don't
to
want that council member in 2037 cursing me.
And especially, so Kelly, based on the, I don't want to make it too complex, but based on the inflation rate, is it makes sense that we pay less now and pay more later?
That is a preference choice. Stephen, is there any kind of calculation that, or that any kind of wisdom that you could answer that with?
I don't really have a strong opinion. The one thing I could say is that, as Kelly alluded to earlier in his comment, it's quite often the case where a city will opt for a level payment structure, where the amount that they pay every year is fixed and level until the back end, and then it trails off. For budgeting purposes, for planning purposes, and so forth, that's easier. You don't have to find money one year and then the next year when it comes time to budget, you've got an extra money that's available this year but not the following year. It kind of plays havoc with your budgeting process when your debt service schedule is erratic. It could be good one year and bad the next year, and then you're kind of in a bind. Should we start a program? And then how are we going to fund it next year, and so forth? So I think in general, what I've seen is level payments tend to be the most common, just because of the sympathy that it has with the budgeting process.
I have a strong bias for numbers 1 and 3 because of that. I prefer even 1 over 3 because number 3 doesn't save quite as much. But I like the flat budget issues and the fact that at one point then it just falls off with the PERS. That's my bias is 1 and then 3.
Vice Mayor Perkins. Kelly, could you bring us back to the 4-graph scenario? please?
Why don't, or we could go to the, okay, that works too. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a lot of ways to view this, and I think it would be very important for the council and the committee to view it not only through the lens of cost savings, which each of these scenarios accomplish, but also the challenges that we have in the coming years, including next year and the year after. We received ARPA funding, and that balanced and stabilized our budget. But I think it would be remiss not to consider the fact that the next few years for the city, especially with the unknown of the pandemic and whether or not we're going to potentially get the TOT revenues back to where they were. That's a big unknown, whether the travel industry will, especially business travel, will even bounce back. And so I would want to highlight for the council and the committee members that fact that these budget after next year, which we should be relatively stable, having our second tranche of our ARPA funding available year 3, you've seen the 5-year forecast, year 3, 4, and 5, and so on, will potentially pose some challenges, and therefore, maximizing that capability in our budget, and as you can see, would I believe potentially certainly mitigate any negative issues that come and hit us in those outer years. So we would lose money. I don't want to say lose money. We wouldn't save as much money in some of these scenarios. However, it would, if you're looking at stabilization of our budget, that would be something that'd be important to factor into your analysis and your consideration.
I think if I could, what I'm hearing you say then is that in the first maybe 2 to 3 or so 4 years, it might be beneficial to sort of ease your way into a level payment structure, but to have some additional savings in the early years because of the the circumstances that are expected to occur.
That's certainly something I believe the council and the commission should be, or the committee should be considering, and they've had the 5-year, and we'll be giving another 5-year update. But and this is maybe for a topic and discussion for a later date as well. But that would be a consideration that I would highly recommend, understanding, and of course being conservative in not really knowing the status of one of our major revenue sources, which is the TOT. We're hoping it comes back, but there's a lot of conversation out there, especially not leisure travel, but business travel, which is really the bread and butter of San Ramon. There's a lot of conversation that's not going to rebound nearly as quickly.
Yeah, I would say that's a very easy adjustment to make. It's very rare that a city has an opportunity to sort of structure significant savings in this manner. And so it might be an opportune time to do so.
Yeah, I thank you very much for that input, Joe. And you and Kelly obviously have a greater insight into this than I do. But factoring in 2 to 4 years of slightly reduced payments, and then moving forward, but as it applies through like number 1 with an adjustment up through like 26 or so, or 25, where it's down a few $100,000, might be very helpful going forward. What do you think, Kelly?
Yeah, well, from a budgetary standpoint, I like level payments.
Yes.
And it just makes things easy going forward. I would point out, though, that we don't need to, it's good to get your input and get a feel for where you're at, but we don't need to like select one right now. We're just giving you what some different scenarios would look like. So we can always go back and, as Stephen was mentioned, do some restructuring.
Yeah.
One thing in this case that after 10 years, we can do refinance, right? So if we save money and if we get really good in our revenues and let's say with all our, if we get strong as it goes on, then isn't it easy for us to pay it easy in future? So given the circumstance right now, like as Joe mentioned, right now with the COVID uncertainty and TOT, I don't think it will be back at least.
Yes, it would be very easy for you to repay the outstanding balance in whole or in part after 10 years. If you accumulated sufficient funds that that was a policy preference of the council, that would be certainly easy to do. I would observe, however, that at 2.5% interest rate, you might be better off just putting that money in the bank, and by that time maybe interest rates will be a little bit higher.
Yeah, and along those lines, if the discount rate with CalPERS is still above 6% and we're only paying 3% on this money, you don't refinance this, and you would be more inclined to pay down debt at 6% or whatever CalPERS is. It's kind of like, do you pay off your 2% car loan when you got a 14% credit card? You pay off the credit card and let the 2% or 3% car loan just make the payments.
One other thing I could add is I'm also talking with GovInvest. They're the ones that presented to the council back in April.
Right, about the restart.
Right. And so we're talking to them about different strategies. If we wanted to, I mean, some cities have a policy, for instance, of taking all or a portion of the interest rate savings and setting it aside for other, like a Section 115 trust or something along that line. So we're not just looking at pension obligation bonds alone, but considering what other options are available just as a general strategy.
Just as a strategy, if we were to do a pension obligation bond for like you say, the $20 million, and so you've got 17 left, could you do a restart then at some future date on the remaining 17? That
you can do a restart, as far as I'm aware, anytime you want to. The only thing with a restart is once your money is restarted, it's done. You cannot ever go back and change or decide you didn't want to put in that much or anything else. It's a one-time commitment.
Yeah, and we certainly want to wait until after the CalPERS board meets and makes their discount rate decision.
Right. So Christina, if you want to go back to page 122 there. This is just a synopsis of all four of those saving scenarios that we were just looking at. And then next slide, please. This shows what the all-in true interest cost would be for each of the various scenarios. It does change a little bit for each one. So scenario 1, 2.54%. And you see the rest of those numbers across the way. Total and the true interest cost, again, includes interest cost plus cost of issuance. The total pension obligation bond debt service, so principal and interest, with scenario 1, you're spending 37.4. And I should say scenario 3 is the lowest at 35.9, going to the highest, scenario 4 at 40.7. There's again the total savings amounts. And if you were to discount those savings back to net present value, 10.4 million in scenario 1, 9.7 in 2, 11.1 in 3, and 9.5 million in scenario 4. Now that last number is a little bit confusing. It's the savings as a ratio of the amount of principal paid off. So for instance, in scenario 1, if you remember, we were going to pay off 29.2 million in UAL, and we would the net present value of those savings is 10.4 million. So that equals a net present value savings of 35.7%. It's a way to just compare each of the deals across each of the scenarios in a apples to apples type of comparison.
Yeah, Kelly, can I add one point?
Sure.
On your last point, I think the bottom line number there, it's a very good way of thinking about how much the overall savings are in terms of pension obligation bonds versus paying off your UAL. If you assume that that CalPERS were to keep their discount rate, we assumed a 6.5% discount rate for the entire term of the bonds. So all of these savings measures are measured against the assumption that they keep it at 6.5. However, if they were to lower it to 6 or 5 or whatever, then the savings would go down somewhat proportionately. The other thing I just wanted to emphasize, which is critically important, is that interest rates bounce around quite a bit. We've been in a fairly stable interest rate environment recently, but that's not necessarily the norm. And so the numbers that we show you today are reflective of today's interest rate market, but that tomorrow or next week or next month, you need to be mindful of the possibility that the numbers could change for better or worse, and that at the end of the process, if you should go down this path, at the very end of the process, just before it concludes, we could always find ourselves in a bad interest rate environment for some reason, and it might not make sense to do this because we can't lock in the interest rate until the very, very end. So I just want to emphasize the importance of the possibility that it may not look this way at the end, and if it doesn't, well, there's no cost, no harm, no foul. I'm not suggesting that's likely, but it needs to be said.
Well, one thing is, I'm sure you guys, you all watch the Fed. What is the Fed doing with interest rates? And the Fed is likely to raise interest rates if they're sensing an unexpected or unsatisfactory level of inflation. At least that's my read on it. They have their targets for inflation. They like to see a little bit, but they don't like to see a lot. And so if they start getting a sense of it's too much inflation, they'll bump their rates. And what do they meet? Quarterly? The Open Market Committee meets what, quarterly?
Every 6 weeks.
Oh, every 6 weeks. Okay.
And that's an extremely important factor to weigh.
Yes.
I mean, they are looking at inflation on a daily basis. They're looking at the markets, and they're just poised to pull the trigger as soon as they feel that it's warranted.
Yes. And so reading the minutes of the Open Market Committee and listening to whatever Fed chairman Powell says, either in front of Congress or in other public venues is very important, because that moves the market every single time, and one way or the other. So, but everything we're seeing at this time is saying they're satisfied that the current level of inflation is sustainable, and it's a little higher than they probably would like, but they don't believe it's a long-term threat. Am I reading the Fed properly?
Yeah, I think that's transitionary inflation, right? So because of the supply chain problems, so they're saying once the supply chain stabilizes, then we don't see this kind of inflation. So that's what they're saying at this point. But definitely there will be inflation with all the amount.
Yeah, the Fed is being fairly accommodating when it comes to inflation, both because of, as you say, they may be transitory or temporary inflation. But I think the overriding factor that's driving the Fed right now is that they are hopeful that the economy and the number of jobs and the unemployment rate and the participation in the labor market will improve before they need to raise interest rates. I think they would like to see some of those 7 million jobs that we're short And with COVID now, sort of resurgence of COVID and having a sort of a pause in the rate of growth in the economy, I think there is a possibility that they may just kind of bide their time and wait a little bit longer. But those are the tensions that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I think they're willing to see wage increases because they believe that wage increases will actually increase the incentive for people to get back into the job market, whereas they may have been sitting on the sidelines. That combined with the discontinuation of some of the unemployment benefits and the discontinuation of the eviction prohibitions. All of those things will tend to drive people back into the employment market. You can see, particularly from this graph here, from this page here, that my bias of numbers 1 and 3 are serve us well, I think, in the future. And while I like the total savings associated with number 3, the fact that there's some payments in years 23, 24, 25, 26 that are higher than we're used to can really start to bite our budget a little bit harder. Maybe that's a time we use some of our trust, 115 trust or something like that to knock the tops off of some of those payments. But numbers 1 and 3 are the ones that I prefer.
Thank you. Should we move on to the next slide?
Please.
Okay, so sources and uses of funds, we'd be issuing, or we would be paying back 30.4 million to the bond holders, and that would be comprised of the uses of the funds. 30 million of that would be going to pay off CalPERS and 375,000 in cost of issuance. Next slide. This just breaks down what the cost of issuance would be. We have the underwriter, the bond and disclosure counsel, financial advisor, rating agency, all of these people that would be involved in the deal. This is called the financing team. And so in order to, the cost of issuing the bond would be around $375,000.
Kelly, can I make one quick observation on the slide?
Sure.
I just wanted to, in the interest of transparency, normally what we would do to make sure that all of the people involved in a transaction are being paid appropriately, we would show the city maybe the last 10 to 15 pension obligation bonds that have been issued by cities in California over the last, say, 3 to 6 months, and how much each of the professionals on each one of those transactions was paid for each role that they served, to give you a sense of, what's the market, what's the norm for these kinds of services, if you look at, the industry wide. And that gives you a sense of transparency. Are you getting paid more or less than somebody else got paid for doing the same work for another client? I just wanted to point that out so that these don't seem like they're kind of pulled out of thin air.
So in this case, so we are with the issuance cost, we are almost paying 1%, right?
Approximately, yes. Yes. Yes.
So Kelly, when we are talking about this 3.0%, are we including this cost of issuance also into it?
Right. The cost of issuance is built into the true interest cost.
Okay, so that's 3%, which includes this $375,000.
Yes,
Right.
when we call it the all-inclusive interest cost, that's intended to convey, it includes both the interest expense that you pay to the bond holders, and then we treat these expenses, these cost of issuance expenses, as just another cost, and that's what that all-inclusive rate reflects.
Thank you.
Okay, you'll be glad to know we have one more slide. So part of the strategy for issuing these bonds would be establishing some guidelines, a policy for pension bond issuance. We could do it either by putting some of these parameters within the reso itself, and it would just apply to this pension bond, or we could set a separate policy that would, of course, apply to any pension bonds going forward. And Stephen did some research and pulled up how other cities, some of their parameters, their policies, and we went through those and pulled out the things that we liked the most, that made the most sense to us. Some of these parameters could be that first bullet, bond principal payments shall not extend beyond the final maturity of the UAL being refinanced. So we can't extend the length of the repayment past what we already owe. The bonds shall be subject to optional redemption within 10 years at par. This is basically saying that we won't have the make whole provision, for instance, that the 2010s have that preclude it from being redeemed. The bond shall only refinance the UAL and shall not be used to pay any current or normal costs. So that's self-explanatory. Only pay off UAL. The normal cost continues to go forward. The all-inclusive true interest cost of the bond shall be at least 2.5% less than the CalPERS discount rate. So that's the kind of establishing what the spread has to be in order to move forward with this deal.
So if they were down to 6%, we've got to be 3.5% or lower.
Yeah, right. And then the bonds shall provide cash flow savings at least to 20% of the UAL being refinanced as measured on a net present value basis, except for the refunding bonds. This is that number that we were looking at on the previous chart.
At the bottom, the 35%.
35, right, exactly.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
And then,
can I make one quick comment?
sure.
Yeah, I wanted to just emphasize that it's very important that that you not do anything that could subject you to a criticism. There have been many instances in the past where people have issued pension obligation bonds and done things that conflict with these policy prescriptions. They've extended maturities. They've done so with very limited savings. And they've used the pension obligations to bonds to pay current and or normal costs in order to achieve a short-term budgetary savings. They've extended maturities egregiously. So the idea here is to build a set of policy prescriptions which would protect you from any accusation that you're doing something wrong. I mean, that's really what's going on here.
I agree. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. So that's all we have to present at this point. There's a lot of information that was included in the packet. Our apologies, Sridhar didn't have a chance to be able to read through all of that. But what we would like to do is just to get your approval to come back at a future finance committee meeting with more meat on the bones, and to see if this is something that you're interested in moving forward with. We could come back with a real proposal next time. And then secondly, the next meeting is actually not scheduled until the end of October, October the 25th. That puts us a little bit behind the 8 ball if we were to try to close this deal before Christmas or before the Christmas holidays. Once Christmas gets in there, then the markets things can get spread out and take longer, and if we were to do this, we'd prefer to kind of try to close before Christmas. So we would be looking to do a special meeting at the beginning of October if you're open to that, just for this one particular item.
I would, but the very first week of October, I'm out on vacation. So that 2 through 9 of October, I'm out. But the week following, I would absolutely be, I would move heaven and earth to attend.
Okay. Joe, did you have a comment?
No, just thinking, what's the typical timing to from beginning to close on something like this?
You know, if we were to start work today, and if it were possible to bring this back to you during the week of, say, October 11th, for example, for a special meeting of the Finance Committee, and if at that time you were willing to, or you elected to refer this to the City Council for their consideration, and if at the next City Council meeting, which is on October 26th, if they were to approve the transaction at that meeting, then the bonds could be issued and closed by the week of November 22nd, which is the week just running into Thanksgiving. So it's a 10-week schedule. The key milestones in any schedule of this sort are always Finance Committee meeting and City Council meeting. We need to sort of navigate around those. And so a special meeting on the week of October 11th, if you favorably decided to refer this to the council for their consideration on the 26th, then that would put everything on track to close on or about the week of the 22nd of November, which is before the, as Kelly mentioned, Thanksgiving holiday runs into the Christmas holiday, and it's probably better to think about January rather than December, just as a general rule.
I would also suggest if you could work it out the week of the 27th of September. That's 2 weeks from today. I don't know if that is pushing the system too hard, but if you're going to have a special meeting with one agenda item, I can be available the week of the 27th. In fact,
so why don't we try to see if we can accomplish that and wait until we get closer to the agenda deadline, and then if Kelly feels that we're sufficiently well prepared to do so, but if we're not able to provide you with the,
I don't want to be unprepared and have to do it twice. Sridhar, do you feel generally positive about doing something like this?
Yes, I feel positive about this, and September 27th, I'm alternate, so hopefully Sabina will join. If not, then I'll be joining this call for sure. I don't have any problems.
Okay.
Join the call.
Before we're done, we do have one public. I'll open the floor for public comment. So we'll take public comment, and then we'll take final comments in the committee.
Hi, I think that this presentation is very fishy. Mr. Gortler, I suppose, is the vendor, is telling the committee that, you know, it's important to know that, you know, you're not doing anything wrong. Usually that's indication that something is not right. And I really feel that this is not the right timing. I know the intention is good, but just imagine if you are the police officers or you are city staff who have been working for decades for us, and you're about to retire. How would you feel about this? Looking at page 122, currently we're 80% charged. We are not in deficit. So this is all like, you know, you going along with the financial vendors, theoretical, you know, incentive there that it's going to be better for us. I fail to see that right now. Our economy is in such a volatile stage. We have an administration who is very confused. Just look at Afghanistan. And you have all these changes of industries. Now Wall Street is a mess. This is the worst time to gamble people's pension fund. I agree with Mr. Gorton. I think it was Mr. Gorton, our city manager, who was trying hard to let you know, hint, hint, not the best time. And you guys are trying to close this before this calendar year. Totally bad idea. Can't you wait a little bit? Just let things settle a little bit. And then maybe the first quarter of next year, we can review their proposal and then close things next year if it's necessary. I really don't feel comfortable at all. And please consider this a warning to you as a resident. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any last comments, Sridhar?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks,
Okay.
Stephen. Thanks, Kelly and Joe.
Yeah, I thank you very much for putting this together. Kelly, I really appreciate all the extra work you're putting into new policies and looking for ways to save money. You know, Ava and Candace did a fabulous job for years and years, and this is not a reflection on them, but this is some of the value you get with new eyes, and having new eyes to take another peek at something from newest set of experiences could benefit us greatly going forward. And we appreciate the time and effort that you and you put into this, and I look forward to seeing where we can go. So if we can get it together in 2 weeks, let's do it in 2 weeks. If not, we'll meet in 3.5. Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, city or community committee member comments? Way too much fun, isn't it, Sridhar? Hey, you get this. You get a special thank you from Sabina next time.
Yeah, looks like. So I don't have any comments. I'm good.
Okay, I don't either. I want to thank staff and finance division manager Candace and Kelly and Joe and everybody that helped out on this. Thank you very much, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.